And hello, you are watching the Pure Passion Biz Podcast with Akua Hinds. I am your host, Akua Hinds, and this is part two of my interview with Kimberly Gawne. Kimberly is the founder of Star Students, a company that provides alternative education for students in North America and worldwide. And Kimberly, I loved our discussion in the first part of the interview that we have had. And I want to know from you, based on your experience working with families, what are the top 5 reasons that most people share with you about pursuing homeschooling?
Reasons, like there are reasons for pursuing homeschooling, you mean?
Yes, I realize that every person's journey is different. Every parent's journey is different. Every student's journey is different. But what are
Mhm.
some of the top common threads that you see for their reasons to try homeschooling, their reasons to not pursue the public schooling path?
Right. To try something different. Yeah, great question. I would say the number one top reason that I hear is curriculum control. Now that covers a variety of subtopics as well. A lot of parents wish to be able to have more control over the curriculum than they currently do, right? And it's ironic because the public school is supposed to be for the public. You would think that the public would have some say in what goes on, right? And that's not to say that they don't, because I know, there's parent meetings, there's board meetings, there's different kinds of ways that parents can make their voices heard. But the number one reason that people come to Star Students is because they either do not agree with the curriculums being put in place at schools, or they do not feel they have enough control over what sort of curriculum is being taught at the schools, whether or not they have a choice and whether it's implemented or not, right? Those are two kind of subtopics, but the general complaint, I suppose, and rightfully so, is that they don't have enough curriculum control in the public schools, and so that's why they're looking for something alternative. I would say the second reason would just be because they don't want to send their children to public school. They want their children to have something that's more holistic. They want their children to grow up in a freer mindset, and just able to discover their full potential. That's not to say that students who are in public school can't discover their full potential, by no means. But what it does mean is that public school limits those children very, very, very harshly, because that's the nature of the system, right? You're looking at a mass system that's meant for the entirety of the globe, essentially, the entirety of the world. You can't expect to churn out, great thinkers and great people, right? Like,
Great
or I'd say, I
leaders.
wouldn't say but great citizens, right? Like, and
Right.
with great ideas and inventors and physicists and all these really, really driven and passionate people, because that's not what the school system was designed for, right? And many parents realize this, and so I would say that's reason number two. They just want better for their children, and they know that there is better, and they're willing to do what it takes, whether it's by themselves or with some guidance or with a community of professionals or people around them. They're willing to do those sorts of things to get there. um and then I'd say the third complaint that I hear the most, or the third thing that I hear the most, I suppose, is that they they know that homeschooling is more flexible, and they want to be able to provide their children with that flexibility, right? Many parents realize, and that kind of goes along with the second one, but many parents realize that their children maybe aren't morning people, and they don't want to be up at 7 in the morning, or 6 in the morning, or like even 8 o'clock is early, right? It just depends on how the schedule works for a lot of people. But if a parent works from home, this is the lucky portion of it. If a parent works from home, or if parents work from home, or they have the ability to homeschool their children themselves, maybe with guidance, or by themselves, then they're able to build that flexible schedule, right? So it's not just a matter of learning in a holistic manner and learning like real life skills and things like that. It's also a matter of making sure that your child is paid attention to in the way that they need to be paid attention to, in their best way for learning, in their best mode of learning, right? At their best time of the day. You can build things around your schedule, right? As much as is possible. Obviously, most parents are not going to be willing to do something from like midnight to 3 a.m. Okay, we're doing school now, right? Most kids are not either. But it's just that idea of flexibility within the home. And so that's another reason why I think parents, especially those who work from home or who have, maybe a full-time and a part-time, or a full-time and a work from home, whatever the situation might be, if they have that extra flexibility, then they're looking at other alternatives because they recognize that it's just better for their children.
Absolutely. And I think that the flexibility issue is a good one, because there are some families where the parents, they might not have days off on the weekends. The weekends might be their busiest days, so they want to be able to spend certain days of the week with their families. And so if they homeschool, they can choose to make their weekend days like Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and then school, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Or if they want to just have school be 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week, they can do that too. Or if they want to make it more or less. And also some families that move around a lot, whether for work or just because they like to explore the worlds that they're in, homeschooling can be a wonderful way to provide an education for the children while still being able to live the lives that they want to live. Also, I'm curious, do you have families who have chosen alternative education? Because really homeschooling is just another form of private education, only it's more flexible, it's most of the time it's more affordable, and it's even more private than a private school. The private schools are great institutions, but homeschooling experience is another form of private education. Have you heard any parents say to you that they've chosen alternative education because they want their children to have good influences around them, and they're concerned about the types of individuals in the public school system? I know that for myself, I grew up in a nice neighborhood and such. However, not everybody in a public school is coming from the same area. And even if somebody is in a nice area, that doesn't mean that the families are necessarily training the children in a way that they're training them to respect others. But I know that when you're in a public school setting, you're around other people who are coming from all different walks of life, and they may not share your values, and they may not treat others the way that you feel is appropriate. And I think that that's where a lot of issues happen in school, a lot of inappropriate behavior towards each other, a lot of labeling, unnecessary drama. Have you had any parents mentioning that to you, that they've chosen alternative education to avoid those types of issues?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there is a very dark side. I know I can't even say I think I know. There's a very dark side to public school, and the way that a lot of public schools are run. And that's not to say that the teachers are horrible or the children are horrible. Not at all. It's just that you're looking at as I said in the last podcast where we did, you're looking at a mass system, right? That's a system that's been designed by humans, by men, that really doesn't serve the vast majority of people, right? So I would say, I mean, looking at it from a business perspective, I suppose it's a failing system. But I do have many parents, and I know with the when March of 2020 happened, and everything kind of everything went haywire for a little bit, and people kind of had to find their footing and whatnot. Parents started to really realize that, like, because school was literally like, it was online, which there's nothing wrong with online, but the way in which it was done was so inefficient and so not good, like horrible for learning and horrible for the kids. And parents really got a glimpse into, like, this, because many parents were home from work as well, right? Whether they were working from home or off on leave or whatever. And they got a glimpse into what their children were learning. They got a glimpse into, like, how the sort of school situation is, right? And a lot of parents who come to Star Students anyways will say, you know, like, that was the moment that I realized, or that was kind of like my slow awakening. And I realized that, like, it's not something that is, that is not feasible for me to do myself, right? Especially when you have children who are in elementary school, right? Elementary school is a little bit easier. Once you get into like grade 6, 7, 8, maybe some math, right? I have a lot of parents who are like, I can't teach math. So they just want to like rent out that one subject, right? That's another thing with homeschooling, is it provides you with so much flexibility. If you want to teach your child, you know, because you have all these different curriculums and you want to teach them from this one, and you've got the professional guidance to make it all work, then go for it. But if there's a subject you don't want to teach, right, then you can rent that out. That's something that you can do. And the reason I mentioned that is because you mentioned positive adult role models, right? Like
And peers
parents
too.
want.
I want to specify too that, sorry to interrupt you there, but I want to specify too that the peers are also an important factor, because you might have a child who, and I know that you've taught in a traditional classroom as well. You might have children whose parents really invest the time in them, and their parents invest the time in the home and making sure that it's a positive environment. But they might be sending their child out to be in a school environment where they're around other students who may not have that same type of experience. And those other students just don't interact with them in a positive way. And there are parents who, I mean, let's face it, I mean, we become like the 5 people who we spend the majority of our time with. And if you are spending time with people who are, whether you're younger or older, but if you're spending more of your time with people who are a negative influence, it's not good for you, right? And I see homeschooling as a way where parents can help their children to make choices about how they want to live and what types of people they want to have around them, instead of being in a classroom with people who are forced upon them. And they're just surrounding themselves, spending more of their time in the classroom with those students just because they happen to be born in the same year. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's all they have in common. You know, like attracts like. And just because somebody's born in the same year, or lives within a certain mile radius, and that's why they're going to that public school, doesn't mean that they have things in common or that they're on the same path. And so,
Right.
what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's okay. Okay, that's getting into some sticky territory. So I agree. Let me say that. I agree with you, because as a parent, you want to make sure that the children that your child or children are interacting with are also along, not necessarily along the same life path, but also like parents that hold the same sorts of values, right? You wouldn't want your child, like, you know, being like being bullied at school, right? And so
Or
you wouldn't.
influenced by the wrong people, by people who just do not share
Or,
the values that you want your child to be exposed to.
right. And so yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that, is yes, you want to be careful who it is that you're exposing your children to, right? In terms of their peers, of course. In terms of adults, that's another conversation that we can get into. But in terms of their peers, you want to be careful of who you're exposing them to, because you don't want them to think that it's okay to behave in certain ways that other children do, right? And that's not putting blame on anybody. That's not putting shame on anyone. But you as the parent have to be very aware of what your child is being exposed to in terms of other kids, right? Are they associating with children who put a value on manners? That's a very simple one, right? Are they associating with children who place a value on a work ethic? Are they associating with children who think that it is important to treat everyone with respect and with tolerance, regardless of what their religious beliefs are, or their political beliefs are, or anything of the sort, right? And I realize that's maybe a bit much for this podcast and talking about like school, but if we're going to talk about people and influences, those are some of the hard facts that you have to look at, really. You want to make sure that your children are being raised in a positive environment. And that doesn't mean that it's, positive, like it's always rainbows. No, there's going to be some painful growth experiences, but how we handle those growth experiences and how you handle those growth experiences is something that is, I think, of utmost importance. And I don't think public school does a good enough job about that. Not placing blame, but that's something that they just can't do themselves.
Absolutely, I do agree with you. And there are some good teachers out there, and there are some good families who make the choice to choose public education. But when you have more control over um, who you and your family are choosing to align yourselves with on a day-to-day basis, you can implement those important lessons of kindness and personal responsibility and having a love for learning in a way that just isn't seen in the public school system. And for the most part. And so, and I agree 100% with that. And so, do you find that more and more that's a reason why families are choosing to pursue alternative education?
Yeah, because they want to, I mean, I mentioned curriculum control in the previous podcast that we did, and that's one of the reasons that families choose to. I think that, yeah, having their children be around, choosing who their children are around as they're in that emotional development stage, right, is really important. There's a gentleman that I was listening to the other day. I wish I could recall his name, but I can't. And he was coming from a very faith-based perspective, and he said, for a Christian parent, and these are his words, not mine, but he said, for a Christian parent to send their child into public school is akin to sending a child into a war zone, into a battle, and giving them like a machine gun and expecting them to like know how to operate it, right? So, I mean, neither here nor there with the point itself, but it just demonstrates that I think that you have to be very careful about your child's emotional development, right? How you want your child to learn how to cope with stress management, how you want your child to learn how to deal with problems that happen, right? I find that that is a very common reason for parents to want to homeschool their children, because they want to make sure that their children are educated in the ways that they believe are right, which often comes down to making sure that they can be responsible, making sure that they have a work ethic, making sure they treat everyone with respect, and that they tolerate everyone around them, and that they listen to people and treat people with dignity. Making sure that they are capable of handling multiple things at once, right? Teaching them these life skills that they don't necessarily get in school because of all the additional fluff that's provided. And realistically, you can't teach 30 kids like stress management in the same way. You can't teach 30 kids critical thinking in the same way, right? Every child is slightly different. Yes, there are some common patterns, and it's easier if you're in a, one-on-one or one-on-two or one-on-three. If you're 1-on-30, that's a different story, right? And so it becomes very difficult to teach those sorts of skills. And I think parents, that is very much a reason why parents have said, nope, you know what, we're going to homeschool because we can just do it better. We can do it better.
I completely see that. And I have seen that the homeschooling families who I have interacted with and the homeschooled students who I have taught, I've noticed a huge difference with them. I mean, they were able to look me straight in the eye, have conversations, full sentence conversations
Yeah.
without feeling awkward. They were able to interact with children. They were able to interact with adults with ease. And they were very loving.
Mhm.
For the most part, they were very kind, very loving, very aware, and more confident, I feel, than some of the public school students who I have taught. And so, because I do private teaching part-time, and so I have noticed that throughout the years. And um, what is so homeschooling can be done online, it can be done in person, it can be a combination of both. Star Students is an online company, but what are your tips for successful online learning?
So to come, I would say I've got three. I have three like top tips for successful online learning. One of them would be that you have to have a solid digital literacy foundation. And I mean, if you're not there yet, then you can be, right? If you don't have a solid digital literacy foundation, you have to be willing to learn, right? There is, as much as we all can sit here and say, it was better in the old days and this and that, we can talk about that all we want, but like the internet is not going anywhere, right? Regardless of what you do in life, whether you work as an employee, whether you work as a contractor, whether you are free or a freelancer or of some sort, whether you own your own business, whether you're the boss of a company, whether you're a network marketer or someone working in affiliate marketing, whatever it is that you're doing, the internet is a 99.9% chance that it's going to be involved. Because if you're not out there, people can't find you. And if people can't find you, then you don't have a business, right? So maybe this is more along the lines of everybody except an employee. But I would still say that even working as an employee, if that's the life path that you choose for yourself, digital literacy is necessary because the internet's not going anywhere. Computers are not going anywhere, unless we have like a World War III scenario, but like, let's not get ahead of ourselves, right? Like it's important to have a solid foundation when it comes to digital learning, right? And to digital, like just digital literacy in general is important. So if that's not something that you have, then that's something that's important to work at, because online learning is made so much smoother if you have that. Now, that being said, there are some students that come to us and have absolutely no clue about how to operate anything. They certainly don't leave that way, right? We can walk them through things and make sure that they understand things, not just with us, but also just in terms of online and the online world, right? Online safety is really important, particularly when you're teaching children and you're dealing with children. I think that's something that's very, very important to stress. My second
Sorry,
tip,
I just
my
want to
second
say,
tip,
so are you
yeah,
basically saying that it's important to be progressive about the internet, not fear it or not shy away from it? Is that what you're saying? Like be willing to be
yeah.
coachable?
I hesitate to use the word progressive because I don't like to be associated with like the I hesitate to use that, but yes, progressive in terms of making sure that you're keeping up with the tools that are there, right? Something that I always stress to people, and this is actually my next point, is making sure that you use technology. You don't let technology use you, right? And so yes, this technology is here. Yes, we have the internet. Yes, we have all of these wonderful tools at our disposal. Let's learn to use them properly instead of having them take advantage of us and be time stealers or be energy suckers, right? Social media is huge for that, right? So teaching a concept of responsibility around digital literacy is my second kind of point here, is that you have to make sure that when you are teaching digital literacy and when you are learning digital literacy, this is a responsibility, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And we have amazing power at our fingertips with the internet, with the technological tools that we have. You need to make sure that we use them, right? And that's where the progressive attitude sort of comes in. Use them for your benefit, right? But be conservative in the way that you allow them to use you. I would say don't let them use you at all. You want to get control, right?
Those are really fabulous tips. And I really love what you said, Kimberly, about the good old days and how some people are still not trusting towards technology. They still feel
Mhm.
very skeptical. I mean, I was born during the 1980s, and I
Mhm.
remember the days before the internet. I remember when the internet came in. I've seen my parents embrace the internet, and that it's so much easier. You don't have to use map books. You could just go on Google Maps and you can find what you need. And you can use email, you can use tools to communicate with people within seconds. And I still find it, especially because I myself, I have a couple of different online businesses, as you know, and I find it
Mhm.
amazing that there are people who are still um, skeptical about the internet. And so I love what you said about being willing to be open about using the internet as a tool, as a learning tool to make life easier. And I really appreciate you sharing about that. Um, a Harvard study conducted during the year 2021 shows that the majority of homeschool students turn out to be happier and more well adjusted than their peers who were educated at public school. I think this study looks at students from childhood through to adulthood. I know that your company it's pretty new, it's a couple of years old, but have you
Yeah.
noticed this at all?
I definitely have in terms of seeing like how kids are. You're right. We've only been operating like officially as a company since 2021, right? So I have noticed in that time frame that the students who are homeschooled, they tend to just be more carefree. The biggest difference I notice though, the biggest difference I notice is that they are not afraid to take risks with their learning. And I'm sure as a teacher, you understand that phrase, but like for our listeners, maybe I'll just clarify. When teachers say, or people in education say, take risks with their learning, it means very simply that they're not afraid to learn something new and perhaps mess up in that process, right? I mentioned in our last podcast or in part one of our podcast that our youngest student is 5 years old. And she's learning how to read. She's bound and determined she's going to read before the end of the school year. So, we're starting like from the basics. We're starting from the alphabet. We're starting from scratch. And learning the sounds and then blends and digraphs, and they all come together to make words. But one thing that I noticed with her and with the rest of the students in our program and other homeschool students that I've talked to, they're not afraid to say, "Oh, I don't understand. Do you mind like explaining that further?" Or "What do you mean?" Or "That doesn't make sense. I need you to explain that a different way." Right. And then if they still don't understand it, they're okay, all right. Um, maybe I need to take a break. Right. They're very much aware of self-regulation. This particular 5-year-old is very impressive because her vocabulary, she's 5, you wouldn't know she's 5 from her vocabulary. You could close your eyes and you think you were talking to a 10-year-old. And when she doesn't understand something, she has no problem saying that. Or when she forgets something, she has no problem saying that. I don't remember, Miss Kimberly. Can you remind me? It's quite cute. But just that willingness to be open and that willingness to say, hey, can you remind me? I forget or I don't remember. Or oh, oops, that's not it. Right. They're more willing to mess up. That's okay. I find that with public school students, there is this fear of messing up. For a good reason, because in public school, if you mess up, well, that's your grade, right? When you are taking it from a homeschooling perspective, it's not as stressful as, oh my gosh, I have to get this test done and it's got to be perfect. And if it's not, and they're okay with, the homeschool students are okay with making a mistake or with learning something new, right? Because they don't have that constant stressor of like, well, this is your mark, right?
Kimberly, I'm so glad that you mentioned these issues and that you brought up your precious 5-year-old student as an example. I think it's so great that she's wanting to learn and she has this thirst of learning and that she sounds more mature because when I was growing up in the public school system, I don't know about your experience, but I remember just if you were um, an avid learner, a lot of your classmates would put you down because you wanted to be smart. They tried to dumb you
Mhm.
down and they tried to make you feel like there was something wrong with you for wanting to learn. And I think too that because alternative education, homeschooling education, it's more private. You don't have all of these eyes on you, or you're not afraid. You may be less afraid to say, "Oh, I don't understand this." But when you have the whole classroom and the whole school and all of these teachers and principals monitoring you and assessing you and judging you, you feel less secure. I know I felt that way. And I think that a lot of parents are
Yeah.
also under that pressure of, oh, they want people to think that their child is capable. And so they feel it if their child is maybe not understanding a concept. Their child might be great in certain subjects, maybe not in others, but they feel pressure to want their child to be perfect because they're comparing their child to everybody else in the classroom. And they have instructors who are doing that too.
Mhm.
Speaking of instructors, I think I know the answer to this. But lastly, I just want to ask you, do you ever see yourself teaching in a traditional classroom again? And if so, why? And if
Oh,
not,
brother.
why?
Oh, brother. No, I do not ever see myself going back to a traditional classroom. Um, it would be it would be a rough day. It would have to be a rough day. Not even a rough day, not a rough day. It'd have to be a rough, like, no, I can't even, I can't imagine that because once you have and this is the thing, like once you have the freedom of being able to work outside of the traditional, outside of a system, right? Outside of a system, it's very difficult to motivate yourself to go back there, right? And there's just so many things that I don't agree with. So I don't see myself doing that at all. I mean, I never saw myself running a business, to be quite honest with you. It happened by accident. I just wanted to do what I loved, and Star Students just happened, right? And now it's where it is, and I'm very grateful for the opportunities. I'm grateful for all of the people that I've met, all of the connections that I've made. Um, I have learned, though, never say never. God himself has taught me that lesson. Never say never. So no, I don't see myself doing that. I hope and I pray that I never will have to, because I really don't think I would be happy that way. Um, so that's where I stand on that one.
Well, I hear you completely. In fact, I always felt God telling me that private education is really, the way that myself should have been going. Yes, I was educated in the public school system between the ages of 5 to 18 because that's what my parents decided they wanted to do. Uh, I remember really feeling a sense of freedom and my love for learning increasing when I went to college because at that point, I got to decide what I wanted to study. I got to choose my classes. I got to decide where I wanted to go. And I, I think that when people have more control over their education, that's when they truly find out what they're supposed to be doing, what they're meant to do, and how they can impact their lives in a positive way. And once they do that, they can positively impact other people's lives. I'm going to thank you so much, Kimberly. Um, I want to thank you for everything that you shared. I want to thank you for what you're doing for all of your learners who are enrolled in your system, because I'm sure that what they're learning from STAR students is going to help them to become better citizens of our country and of our world. And so, all of you who are watching today's podcast, Kimberly's contact information is listed in the description. And I want to thank you so much for watching the Pure Passion Biz podcast. This is the second part of my interview with Kimberly Gawne, the founder of STAR Students. Have a wonderful day.